And, if people start dying, the public will very quickly turn on you and expect very, very draconian measures. And they're willing to tolerate very draconian measures. I mean, the public has been willing to tolerate things that I never would have imagined you could get away with doing, in this country. And you've seen it, in a couple.
I remember a while ago studying apologetics and the case for the resurrection of Jesus. And so this one cold case detective out there in LA, he actually he wrote a book, and he talked about how one of the things that is difficult to do when you have conspiracies is to have a lot of people involved, because when you have a lot of people involved, you can't have conspiracies because they they'll squeal, they'll change the stories, they'll lie, all that stuff. And so as I've been studying conspiracies, I found that that's not true. Like, it's not completely true. And so there are two other factors that play in, and you identified one when we were first starting. So the two other things that I think there are, so let's say you've got a lot of people, right, involved. Nobody's going to squeal. Like, it's not in their interest to squeal unless there's pressure on them.
Yes.
Right. So if you're the president of the United States, you can pretty much do whatever you want, and somebody's going to cover it up for you. Or if you do get caught, like, you're probably not really going to have a lot of ramifications on you. So there's little pressure compared to somebody else. But then there's a third one, which is ideology.
It cuts both ways, though, too. Because then all of a sudden there's a lot of upside to revealing that, because you can you can become the famous whistleblower, like who took down an administration. This was the whole thing with these journalists with the Nixon administration, right? So there is some incentive there, maybe not for the people involved to share the information, but for other people to reveal it. So you do get some interesting counterbalance there in some cases.
Yeah, I think a lot of times the people in positions are egotistical. And so Hitler, I mean, if you're massacring millions of people, you've got to know that there's going to be a significant consequence if you fail. But he's like, well, I'm in charge. I've got the power. I'm not going to fail. So I think you see the same thing.
It's also interesting because they, in a lot of the recordings, because they have a lot of like table discussions and things, and there's a lot of hinting around the edges about this. And I haven't gone and listened to all of them, but my understanding is they tend, I don't know that they ever came out in some of these sort of settings and said any of this explicitly. And, so it's very interesting how some of these things happen where they don't get discussed openly. Everybody knows what's going on, but there are a number of settings in which it still doesn't get brought up. And that's the kind of thing you do see happening, I would say, in some contexts with, review of various medical devices and drugs and these kinds of things at FDA, where, okay, here's how the system works, and people are just going about doing their various pieces of the puzzle there, but nobody's going and revisiting, is this the right approach? Nobody's taught, like, there are all kinds of things that aren't talked about, and you could either say, well, so in the case of, let's say, Hitler, I always hate going to Nazis, because it's sort of like the edge case, right? But it's like, well, they're not talking about it, which means like something is going on because nobody's talking about it. Sometimes they're not talking about it because they don't, either there's not something going on, or there's not a conspiracy in the way that I would say, we had with, let's say, what was happening in Germany in World War II. You had, a very clear set of malfeasance operations, going on. Whereas a lot of our institutional challenges, a lot of people may not be saying some of the quiet parts out loud, which is concerning. So whenever there are, things that are known sort of more generally, but nobody talks about it, that's always a concern. But as far as I'm aware, being pretty deep on, on the, having been pretty deep on the industry side and on the FDA side, the challenge in terms of our institutions is that most people believe that the system is operating, as intended, or that it's operating appropriately. But I would argue that operating as intended doesn't mean that it's operating in the best interest or as well as it could to actually fulfill its stated purposes. So if we were designing a system that was focused on advancing the public health, then that system would do more to bring in new entrants. That system would do less to crush new ideas and advances, which can help people. And there's much more of a focus, and it's just sort of a default focus on preventing harm as opposed to accelerating advancements that can be positive. And so there's this very conservative bent to bureaucracies as they grow and to people who are in charge. I mean, just take a look at COVID policies. What's the primary driver? You had some states that took different actions, but in a large state, you will get blamed for anything that goes wrong. And the big thing you can see that could go wrong is that a bunch of people could die in a pandemic. And so if you're overly draconian, most people will end up forgiving you, even if you were wrong. If you aren't draconian enough, you will be seen as, just totally inept and incapable, regardless of why you were, less heavy-handed, in terms of your approach. And we've seen that, work out, where the only reason that people who were less draconian, in certain states, the only reason they've gotten, positive press, let's say in Florida, for Ron DeSantis, is because he ended up being right, not because the actions he took were, more in alignment with, let's say, American values of, liberty and, freedom. If a bunch of people had died, he would be a goat. Nobody would have any respect for him. It's only because he was right that he was able to get away with, holding on to, let's say, these kinds of, values, which is sort of a scary thing, for me, being someone who, wants to see those values of individual autonomy and liberty, free association. I want to see those things advanced. But, I think the only reason the public tolerates, that is when it works. And, if people start dying, the public will very quickly turn on you and expect very, very draconian measures. And they're willing to tolerate very draconian measures. I mean, the public has been willing to tolerate things that I never would have imagined you could get away with doing, in this country. And you've seen it, in a couple different, sort of cultural contexts. But I don't want to derail us too far into that direction.